Hey friends, it's Jamie from Independence Street Tarot and Seasons and Ritual. It's Sunday, the 17th. I want to jump on really fast because this idea of identity shifting and identity shifts um, have been really strong this entire month of August and for Leo season. And so some things were coming through, and so I came and started writing and jotting down some notes. And I want to talk about them while they're still kind of fresh and forming in my mind, which means that I look like this. But let's get into it. So we're still in this grand air trine, and I want to really point out the fact that we are moving more into this fire and air axes, and that is going to be a totally different feeling from the water earth axes that we've been in. Um, and even right now, so we're in Leo. We're finishing up Leo season, and the opposite of Leo is Aquarius. So we have fixed fire and fixed air. We just had that the full moon in Aquarius. And we're in this grand air trine, which includes Pluto, who's in Aquarius, Mars, who's in Libra, and Uranus, who has just moved into Gemini. And the more that I'm sitting in Uranus in Gemini, remember Uranus moved out of Taurus, where it's been for 7 to 8 years. And I always say that because, when they first move in, they usually retrograde back. So even Uranus is going to retrograde back into Taurus for a little bit in November. So that's going to be really interesting. Um, but then it'll come back and be in Gemini for 6 or 7 years. So anyway, we have this Gemini. So we have this Uranus in Gemini. Gemini is air, it's mutable air. And Gemini is represented by the twins. And Uranus is represents Aquarius. It's Aquarius's modern day ruler. And Uranus is the aha, it's the rebellion, it is the inspiration, it is the idea that comes out of nowhere, right? And the tarot, I often think of it as the tower, because Uranus, you think you're safe, right, in the tower, and then all of a sudden you get that idea where you realize everything has to change, and it's almost like it comes out overnight, right? Could be years, but then when it finally hits you, it's like, oh, it's here, right? It's go time, and so Uranus is bringing that energy into Gemini. Gemini being the twins, and again. This is just what's being shown to me now. This is still really fresh. Uranus is at either 1 or 2 degrees of Gemini, and Uranus is also conjunct Sedna, which I may talk about that, but I may not. But Gemini being the twins, right? We see Gemini often as being duality. We see Gemini as, I have a lot of friends that are Geminis, and actually my Gemini is rising. And they say like Gemini's, lower Gemini is like two-faced and talking out of both sides of their mouth and stuff like that, which I mean, we all have, it's a spectrum, right? We all have lows, highs and lows. Um, but the way that I'm seeing Uranus work with Gemini right now, especially in these young degrees, is this idea, right, of the identity shifting. If we have two identities, if we have multiple identities, um, and I'm not talking about like a personality disorder. I'm just talking about, maybe you present one way here and one way there. And again, this could be it's a spectrum. Um, but it's this idea of them coming together. Like you kind of have to pick, I would say either the middle or actually who you are, because a lot of times we get different identities in order to stay safe. We get different identities in order to move forward. We get different identities for multiple reasons. And so this Uranus in Gemini to me is blowing that up in the sense that we've got to find who we are. We've got to find that middle. And being in that grand air trine with Mars, who's in Libra. And Libra is all about balance, right? And Mars and Aries have gone through this great transformation for the past, 7 years, of them. moving more into understanding what the feminine side is, understanding that they have to work in those feminine realms, right, of receiving compassion, accountability. Mars just can't do things and then expect them to be no consequences or expect other people to clear it up, right? And so Mars is in Libra. And I think people say Mars is in his detriment in Libra, but if you guys have been watching my channel, I don't really believe in detriments. I do like exalt when planets are exalted. I'll go with that, but I don't really buy into the idea of being in a detriment. Because the idea, right, if we talk about personal growth, right, the whole idea is you grow where maybe you feel a little uncomfortable. So Mars maybe feels a little uncomfortable in Libra. I don't think he feels it uncomfortable in Libra anymore due to his changing ways. But anyway, I digress. So Mars is in Libra. Libra is cardinal, okay? Cardinal air. And so Mars is in there, and instead of just charging full speed ahead, he's got to find what his balance is. He's got to find out what his new identity is. So he's trining Uranus, who's in Gemini. So he's trying to learn, how do I speak now? Because this is who I am. This is how I have to present. Um, I can't keep pretending to be one thing when I'm actually this, right? And we see that playing out in politics. I was just watching, I don't know if you guys know this, but basically the gay community is going to say if the Supreme Court reverses gay marriage, then they're going to expose everybody on Grindr. And I feel like this is a good example. Okay. So the idea of living two separate lives, and you guys can do this any way you want. But you can't keep presenting one way, like voting against things when you're authentically gay, right? That's just not going to happen. That's like we're in a new era where you have to be who you are. And that is, um, it can be scary, but it might not be scary, but it just might be confusing. We just might not know, like, well, wait a minute. This is how I always acted with this group of people, and now there's no energy there. I'm not saying you're going to lose all your friends, but I'm saying there's no energy there because the energy has been sucked out and it's turning back into you got to keep showing up with who you are. The energy isn't going to keep feeding things that aren't authentic, things that aren't true. Because the third part of the trine, right, is Pluto and Aquarius. And Pluto is that transformation. Aquarius is fixed air. So the fact that, fixed signs are known as being stubborn. I always see the fixed signs as the temples. That's where you go in. That's where you know what's going to happen. And with Pluto in there, it is transforming, transmuting, killing, if you will, because Pluto is death. The way that things used to be, the way that we thought about things, the way that we spoke about things, the way that we just believed it. And so Pluto in Aquarius is changing all this. And this is all happening rapidly because if you think about air and fire, those are pretty quick moving elements. Water we know can be quick moving. Um, Earth depends, right? Not so much. And if you live in Louisiana or any other southern state, the air doesn't feel like it's moving sometimes. It can be thick as molasses, right? But I digress. But we're bringing in these new elements of air and fire. And so, what is the identity? Who are we now? How are things shifting? Um, and it's important. I just wanted to come on and it's so like because a lot of people, especially in the past 2 weeks, this has been a big theme. And I wanted to come on and just kind of point this out. Clock's 11:11. Because it's important to understand where we are and how all this is changing. Trines are energy that moves quickly because they are 120 degrees apart. There's nothing there to stop them. So we do have Uranus, right? Who again is Aquarius's ruler in Gemini. Gemini is going to, you know, Gemini being mutable is going to let Uranus sort of take the lead, right? They will work harmoniously, but when we had Uranus and Taurus, because Uranus was is fixed air and Taurus is fixed earth, that was like a perfect head-on head match, right? That took things to get going. Those were big movements, coming in to a groundswell. This is quick, right? Because it's in Gemini. And so everything that we've laid the groundwork for is going to start happening quickly. But that could be confusing as us as people because, things that are modeled to us really stick with us. Things that are shown to us, whether we consciously or, know it or subconsciously, they're there with us. And all of that is crumbling right now. I was watching some. You guys obviously know I watch news, but and I usually watch the Bulwark, but they were showing some Republican town halls and people were really pissed off. And one of the things that I was kind of surprised was that the Bulwark was kind of trying to say, and they're not so much anymore, but the first one, they were kind of trying to say that like maybe some liberals or Democrats were planted into this meeting to, troll, jeer, all that stuff. The senator, I think it was Mike Flood, I could be wrong, but even though they said like his district was 90% red, um, and I was kind of like, no, that's, you can be a Republican, you could be a lifelong Republican and not like what the hell is happening in America, right? Your identity as a Republican is shifting, right? Same with your identity as a Democrat or identity as an independent, right? The way that we see ourselves in ideas, all of that can be shifting. You don't have to like where things are going, right? You can say, I mean, it was all out there, but you just didn't know and you voted for it. Now you're not happy, right? All of this is shifting. All of this is happening quickly. And if you're feeling like, well, who am I? It is this idea of, to me, going back to the heart space, because the heart in your soul, right? They are consistent. And sometimes we people we don't know if they have hearts, right? By the way that they work. But this is about you on a personal basis. And that is really important when we coming into this age of Aquarius, because Aquarius is about the individual first and then the collective. And before, when we were in the age of Pisces, it was all about the groups we were in. And so we kind of identified with the groups that we're in. But we're coming into this age of Aquarius, and it's about identifying individually and then how that works with the collective. And it works all the time. I know people might think, well, if we're all a bunch of individuals, then how do we work together? But we do. We do all the time. But it is this idea of really coming back home to the self, really coming back home to who we know who we are and how we want to show up and how we want to live our lives. Um, and that's part of this identity shift. It is going from it's going from the group to the self, and now we're going to start going from the self to the group. And this is a little awkward for me to talk about because I grew up as an Aquarius, and so I kind of like worked with different groups, right? Which was easy to do for me because I knew what I believed in, right? Um, but some of us it does. It's like, well, I was always a, fill in the blank. And that makes sense to me. If you grew up in this a certain way or things were modeled to you a certain way, and it can go either way. And you could have been like, this was bullshit, so I, went over here and did something else. Like that makes sense to me. But the idea that we're in is not only about raging against the machine, if you will, but also, and it can be a quiet rage, you guys, it doesn't have to be like on 10, but also starting to understand because we're coming back to the self, um, the little pieces in us that formed maybe some of these identities that we no longer identify with, and letting those go. And so, because what else? Okay, let me finish this thought. Because when we let those little identities go within us, that leaves more room for us to become who we want to be, now and moving forward. And that's where we are right now, in the cosmos. This crossroad that we're in. Pluto, and Saturn are sextiling each other, and Saturn and Uranus are sextiling each other. So we still have, so this Pluto in Aquarius is sextiling Saturn, who is in Aries, okay, and a sextile is 60 degrees. So again, that's the open road, okay? The Audubon, if you will. Okay. So Pluto and Saturn are talking into each other. And this is interesting because Pluto um, is talking to Saturn, who's Aquarius's ancient ruler. And so Saturn is playing a big role in this, because Saturn wants boundaries, right? Saturn wants things to be a little more logical. Okay. Remember, Pluto rules Scorpio, which is water, which can be more free flowing, right? That's why we're bringing more feelings back into this idea, of thinking with the heart, bringing more feelings and empathy back into these masculine areas because logic is seen as a masculine trait. We can go in that later, but that's kind of in that shift as well, that shifting of the identity. If it was all logic and it has to go this, and this, right? And we've got Pluto in there, who is water, who is feelings, who is death, who is transformation, transmutation, teaching us, no, we're shifting that identity. It's going more from just the head into the heart and it working together, quite honestly. So Saturn and Pluto are talking about this. Saturn is in Aries. Aries wants to move. Aries is cardinal, so it's initiating this. Um, it doesn't mean it's going to be super easy, but it also doesn't mean it's going to be super hard. It's just being aware of this. And I think it's really important that Saturn is there because it's also sextiling Uranus, who's in Gemini. And again, so Saturn, ancient ruler of Aquarius, now talking to modern ruler of Aquarius, who's in Gemini. And what Saturn is doing, because Saturn's here, Pluto's here, and Uranus there. Saturn is holding that middle. Saturn is making it so things aren't going off the effing rails right now, which is important because Saturn wants to hold space. Saturn wants boundaries. Saturn wants us to understand we only have these two hands and 24 hours in a day. Saturn wants us to understand that those old ways of thinking are crumbling, they're transmuting. We're moving into a new way of how we think. And then it's talking to Uranus, and Uranus is like, okay, people are starting to get a hang of this. We're starting to communicate this. Um, how can we move this forward? And Saturn's saying we're going to move it forward in a good pace. So even if people are starting to freak out, for lack of a better word, or feel a little confused, we're initiating this, okay? Saturn's only a few degrees into Aries and it's retrograding. So we're going to go back over this. The difference is going to be it's not going to be sextiling Uranus when it comes back, but we're getting it started. We're getting it started. And a lot of times when we start things that are new, they can be very exciting, but they can also be a little confusing and a little overwhelming. So, but this is where we are, but the energy is there to keep it moving forward, okay, and not to get us bogged down in this. It is just kind of like the idea and the knowing that this is where we are and this is what's happening. Right now, the sun is also trining Chiron and also Eris. Okay, and um, this is about releasing the past. Okay, Eris. The sun, um, our solar plexus, our self-esteem, right? Chiron, those wounds that we carry, it's lighting it up, letting us, we need to release these things. Eris wants to bring in fairness. Um, she is discord, right? And so she's going to keep showing us where the discord is in order for us to move forward. Okay, this square isn't going to be here long because the sun moves about a degree a day. So, but work with this. Be okay in this energy. Like I'm releasing the past. It's a new start. I can't read my own handwriting. I wrote it's a new start on our well-being. Okay. We don't have to keep being like we were. It's time for a fresh start. It's time for fresh ideas, right? It's time for this fresh energy to come in. Chiron and Eris are both in Aries, cardinal fire, starting things going. The sun is in Leo. Leo rules the heart. So it's really time to start loving ourselves, letting those things go, and working on our own well-being. And whatever that looks like to you, maybe you get a coach, like a life coach. Maybe you clean your house, maybe you donate things, but it's about getting into your well-being, which is the whole being. I'm sorry, I said the sun is in a square. The sun is trining Chiron and Eris. So it won't last that long, but that energy is still there. And that trine again is 120 degrees. The sun is actually squaring Uranus, okay? In this sun squaring Uranus, I was seeing this play out a few different ways, okay? This is, and also with me, this is the idea of being just fed up with things. Okay, just fucking fed up. I'm fucking over it. Sorry, mom, for swearing. Again, that sun, that fixed fire, burning us up, if you will. Uranus and Gemini maybe showing us everything, both sides of every situation, and we're just freaking over it. Okay. But this is here because it wants us to break free of which doesn't support us anymore. Okay. And this runs the gambit. One way that I saw this, or one way that I was seeing this is that my friend's daughter is going into college, and my niece is going into college. So, and we were talking about, and it's really exciting. Um, It's an exciting time. I remember when I went to college 1 million years ago. And but anyway, you meet people in the dorm and all these things. But what's happening is an identity shift, right? And they're shifting from their original mother-daughter relationship to a different mother-daughter relationship. And it's breaking free what doesn't support them anymore. So the way that they were mother-daughter is shifting and changing and moving forward. The way they're going to support each other is going to be different and it's going to look different. A lot of times when we think of breaking free of which that doesn't support us, we might be thinking something huge. We might be thinking like changing jobs or you know, moving states or things like that. But it's also just interpersonal relationships. And when we come to these different times in our lives and how things do have to shift and change, and seeing your children as, young adults and not being there for them. I'm speaking on this. I didn't speak to my friend about this. I'm just seeing it from my eyeballs, but like, and not being them for them in the same capacity because, you got to give them a little more wind under the wings, right? And then maybe they don't come to the parent like they used to because, they need to do that, or setting a different boundary and saying, you've kind of got to pick these things up on your own because I got to change things for me. These shifts and identity shifts are happening fast. Um, they're happening quickly and they're happening in all sorts of areas in our lives. And there could be like more than one area in your life that's blowing up over this. The thing is, the sun that's squaring Uranus, again, was alluding in this to the last thing, but the sun does move, agreed. Okay, so the square isn't going to be there for long, but when it's here, it can be very irritating. And the idea is to see the big picture, understand things are changing, and give it some thought, right? The idea isn't to freak out and lose your temper because we are working with sun energy. And even though there is a lot of benevolent energy on the earth, good vibes, as we say, coming in, we can still lose our temper. I lost my temper last night and it felt great, quite honestly. Um, Let me see. Because that line had to be drawn in the sand. You know what I mean? Like there has to be um what was going on in a certain situation, I had to break free of. Okay? Like I couldn't keep ignoring it. It was time to just say, like, this is enough. Um, Mars is still opposite Saturn. Okay, and that is like endurance. That is being disciplined, right? Understanding the other's influence on your life and how it affects you, right? So standing your ground. Okay. Again, what is your identity? If your identity used to be like ignoring things or just being like, well, that's who they are. But maybe you can't ignore that anymore. Maybe you understand when you are with people, it does affect you negatively. And I can just tell you, like, especially with empaths, we are so in tune to other people's energy that we really need to start setting stronger boundaries. Um, because we can't absorb others' energy anymore. And it doesn't mean we don't like love them or want to be around them, but we also need to read the room pretty quickly and decipher, I don't need to stay here anymore, or I need to go because it's not worth you absorbing all those negative vibes. Mars opposite Saturn, because Mars is in Libra. Mars wants to move forward more in balance. And Saturn, who is in Aries, right? Um, before just maybe be like, you need to chill or something, but now might just be um deciding, okay, what's best for me? What's best for me? What's best for me to cut this play date short, or not show up because so and so is going to be there, right? Because it's this idea of standing your ground, who you are. Um, and it doesn't have to be on 10 because Aries and Mars have gone through that transformation. Saturn just wants to hold those boundaries in that space. Um, and so with that opposition there, right? Saturn is like, okay, are you holding the boundaries? And if Mars is like, no, I feel a little out of balance today because, these people are going through a hard time or having a hard time. Um, and now it's starting to stress me out, then Saturn's going to say, okay, well, what can we initiate in order to not keep having this happen? Or what can we initiate to set up a stronger boundary in order to keep things moving so you are in a safe space, right? Because the idea, if your identity was you just were fucking quiet and ate it and just let people, explode their energetic everything all over you and you were just sitting there absorbing it and being like, oh, okay, and being a good listener or not, like maybe you can't do that anymore. Maybe you don't want to do that anymore. If it's not helping you move forward, then you've got to do what you need to do to keep you in balance. The same thing with maybe you don't need to watch so much social media. Maybe I don't need to watch the bulwark every day. It's about how do I keep moving forward, but keeping myself in balance with this masculine energy. There's one more thing I wanted to say um, about where we are in this time in like releasing old stories and moving into a new identity that is more authentically us. Um, because it is getting out of this idea of always reacting. And I remember conversations that I have with people where something happened and they would be like, I can't even imagine like people think like this or people would do this. And if you've said that and your little heart was confused or, didn't understand, we're moving into your energy, in your space, in your time, okay? And a lot of us have been unconditioned out of it because we've just been kicked in the crotch so many times by society. But that society is crumbling. And because a lot of us have been working out of our heart space, it's almost confusing to start moving into a place that is accepting of heart space. But that is the way that we are moving. Um, and so a lot of us have built these identities to move with the old paradigm, and the new paradigm is here. And it is asking us to get back to our authentic self, our original self, and if we have to do that by, again, getting a coach, if you want me to do a tarot reading, if you want me to look at your birth chart, you can do that. We have other modalities out there to help us focus to who we are, where we want to go, and who we want to be. I was talking to one of my good friends the other night, and she was saying that her first boyfriend popped up, or maybe it wasn't her first, but like maybe her first, second boyfriend, but this guy that she dated in high school. Okay, so like maybe her first um, romance, if you will. And she's like, it's so weird. She was like, that was like 30 years ago, and he just popped in my head out of nowhere. And she was like, he was my first big love and he cheated on me and all that stuff, all that drama you go through when you're in high school. And she's like, I'm not sure why this came up. And I was like, maybe it's coming up so you can release that story that that's not what relationships are supposed to be. And she's like, I think so. And I say that in closing, because it is this idea if things are coming back from 30 years ago, 10 years ago, 6 days ago, um, see if this is coming up because you need to release that because we are moving into a new paradigm. We are moving down to the dark moon. Um, on my Instagram, I'm doing, actually, I think I'm putting it on my YouTube too. Although you can't put a big description like you can on Instagram, but we're doing 13 days of ego death and we're cutting down to the dark moon, of Virgo. And so, but it is this idea because the moon is getting smaller, is that we're releasing all these things in our ego that kept us safe at one time, but are no longer prudent, if you will, moving forward. So you guys can go check that out on my Instagram if you want, or you understand why I'm posting it on my shorts. But it is a time of identity shifts. And it is a time for us to honestly, we're moving back into our most authentic identity. And it doesn't mean it's going to happen overnight. And it doesn't mean that, I mean, it could. Let's not take a poo-poo on miracles, okay? It could, all right? Because a lot of us always know who we really were, right? But then it's again, it's this idea that we've got to get used to being safe. We feel safe in showing up with who we truly are. The planets are all supporting this idea. Okay, the planets are all supporting this move. So we have to get into like that Two of Swords energy of discernment and keep using that energy to move forward. We can't see with our eyes, right? We've got to get in that meditative state where we are in our heart, and in our minds, and they're moving as one, right? Uranus and Gemini, heart and the mind moving as one. Pluto and in Pluto in Aquarius, right? Pluto, watery womb energy in that mind energy, right? Creation, right? The mind in the womb, creation. Right now, Mars is in Libra. Mars wants to move. Libra wants things in balance. Okay. We're all working together with this. So anyway, I hope this helps. If it does, share with a friend, like and subscribe, all those things. I will definitely see you in a few days when we get the Dark Moon video up. And again, if you're not following me on Instagram, it's Independent Street Tarot. And I'm doing the 13 days of ego death. I think we're on day 6, so we're counting down the days. But again, I will also post it to my shorts here. So I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your Sunday, and I will see you soon.